Hello and greetings everyone, Darth Boreas here. Today I'm going to talk about lightsabers once again, this time about lightsaber fighting styles. Now the big thing to get out of the way right now, right at the start, is that the people who invented in universe, in real life, the Star Wars fighting styles have no idea, like no clue at all what a fighting style is. We have a lot of HEMA channels going nuts about how stupid the lightsaber combat is and stuff like that. And part of that can be explained away because, as I said in my first video, lightsaber combat is vastly different from normal sword fights because the blades have different properties, they do different things, they have other priorities in fights, and the wielders have supernatural abilities, which kinda makes up for many of the things that are often criticized, because if you factor those in, lightsaber combat makes a lot more sense than most people give it credit for. That being said, the fighting styles are completely stupid. As in, if you look at the official descriptions, what the lightsaber styles are, you literally just get a philosophy, an idea behind it. So you have Shicho is, well, the basics. Everyone learns how to do Shicho. That's just the fundamental basics of lightsaber combat. Aha. So you can master Shicho, right? Yeah, you can. Okay, what's special about it? Well, it's simple. Okay, so it's a simple. What do you mean by simple? Like just whack at things? No, it's more complicated. Ah, okay, so it's not simple. What is Shicho? Well, it's the basic simplistic form, the training form. Okay, it's the training form, and you can master that and become super good at sword fighting with just the kata training form. Okay, like what strikes does it do? It's the training form. Okay, fine. Good. Then you have Makashi. What's Makashi? That's type 2 for the others. Well, Makashi is it's the elegant form. Aha, so you mean that all other styles are not elegant. Oh, well, it's very precise. It focuses on very precise strikes. So the other styles don't aim. They just randomly whack somewhere and hope to hit something. You mean that? Um, well, it's a energy conserving form. Ah, okay, now we're getting somewhere. So how do you achieve that? Well, it just conserves energy. Uh-huh. How? There is no unnecessary movements. Ah, so now we're getting somewhere. Have you examples of any particular things that you do with that? No. Okay, fine. That's not a style. That's a general idea. Then you have form 3, Soriso. It's a defensive style. So you don't defend in the other styles? Are you nuts? No, it's only defense. Only it's a combat form for only defense? Like no offense? How are you supposed to win a fight? Well, the Jedi use it in order to exhaust their opponents until they don't want to fight anymore. So literally just rage baiting your opponent until he gives up? Yeah, kinda. That's not a good idea. That's not a fighting style. And if you rely on that, I mean, against normal criminals, which by the way, Soriso was supposed to be used against common criminals, never against other lightsaber wielders. This tactic might actually work to some degree, because a Jedi with precognition and a solid Soriso foundation becomes so good at deflecting attacks that he could stand there for hours and just deflect blaster bolts. And at some point, the other guy probably just realizes, okay, this is useless, I have lost, and gives up. And that's the idea, to make your opponent give up, raise their hands and say, okay, you can take me in, sir, you won this round. Or they try to flee or something, which would make more sense for criminals. But the general idea is to rage bait your opponent until they give up. That's Soriso philosophy, which is stupid because not one offensive technique, that's kind of stupid. The fourth one is Ataru, and Ataru is basically capoeira gone nuts. Like it's you basically jump around like crazy. It's basically the opposite of Sorisu. In that form, Ataru, you just bounce around like a ball and you do the most acrobatic moves. You're spending as much energy as you possibly can to confuse your enemy and attack from angles that your opponent doesn't see coming, which again doesn't make sense if you factor in that force sensitives have precognition and know what you're doing before you do it. So acrobatics is not gonna help a lot with that. Might still be a little bit tougher to defend against, which is also why this is one of the forms that Jedi kinda banned, because it's focusing on the offense, and Jedi do not want to do that. Famous example of a Jedi who used Ataru is Yoda. Master Yoda actually did go in the offense because his idea was that he tries to avoid combat at all costs, but if he's forced into combat and has to fight, he's gonna fight end the fight as quickly as he can, and that means being super offensive. Palpatine used Ataru to defeat the Jedi who wanted to kill him. So Ataru is super offensive, and also a form that is kinda, so it's an offensive combat style, like every other sane combat style basically. It's super what's the word? It's super exhausting to use it. So that's dumb, and you do all kinds of acrobatic maneuvers. So you are opening up your defense and completely expose yourself to the opponent. Doesn't sound all that useful to me. Like it's with spinning attacks, where you literally turn your back on your opponent and open yourself up to getting hit. Smart, yeah, absolutely. So then we have Form 5, and Form 5 is one of the confusing ones because Form 5 actually is two forms. So it's technically speaking Form 5 and 6, though in universe it's both of these are called Form 5. Why? Because they have a similar idea behind them. So Form 5, the one is called Shien, I think, and Shien is with the lightsaber against another lightsaber, and Gemso is with a lightsaber against blasters. Now the idea of Gemso is that you not just deflect blaster bolts like most Jedi do, but that you deflect the blaster bolt that's incoming in such a precise angle that it goes straight back at whoever shot at you and kills them instead. Which again, not a very Jedi thing to do, I don't think, but that's what that is. And the form Shien is the same idea with lightsabers, so that you deflect your opponent's lightsaber in an angle that they cut themselves. Like if you are, say, in a bind, you would try to force your opponent's lightsabers into their own body so that they cut themselves with their own lightsaber. Or if they strike at you, that you deflect it in a way that it basically hits the opponent. And the whole philosophy behind this Form 5 is that you do counterattacks, that you don't attack yourself, but you use the attacks of your opponent to defeat them, which is a philosophy that you can do. It's basically focusing on counterattacks. That's something we can kind of work with, though again, having a form that's relying solely on counterattacks is also is also very, very stupid, because counterattacks means that you are giving away the initiative to your opponent, and that's usually in real fights a death sentence. It's cool if you can do a counterattack, sure, but there's a decent chance that your counterattack fails. You might miss, you might not see it coming, the opponent might be out of reach, the opponent might have a counter to your counter in mind already, which is, by the way, the style that I used when I did foil and epi fighting. Got me rather far in the sport, because in foil fencing there isn't that much you can do. So if I see an opponent attacking me, I know how to counter that, and they know how I will counter that, and then I know what they will do to counter what I'm doing, and that's, if you kind of know how it's going, that's how you outsmart your opponent, I'd say, because you react to what they will do before they know that they're going to do it. You're basically baiting them into doing a certain attack, and since you already know that it's coming, you can do something against that. Now, that's the whole idea of the form 5. Now, form 6 is absolutely nuts, because form 6 just says form 6 is all the other forms combined. So it's the first and only decent fighting form that basically every single Jedi, Sith or whatever uses, because I haven't seen a single on-screen depiction of just one form being used by one person. Obi-Wan uses offensive strikes. That's not sorry, so that would technically speaking be form 6, and Niman is the name. And 4-6 is basically said to be a combination of all other forms. Master of none, jack of all trades. You can do everything, but you're not particularly good at anything. That's the idea. So Niman is the only form that's actually viable for combat then. But there's very few people officially doing Niman because it's so difficult to master, and you have to have knowledge of all the other forms to use it. I'd say it's the only form that actually works, and it's the form everyone uses. It's also said to be the only form that you can use with Charkai. Now, Charkai is the art of basically using anything but one lightsaber. If you're using 2 lightsabers, that's Charkai. If you're using a saber staff, that's Charkai. So I completely disagree with that, because using a staff is inherently a lot different than using 2 lightsabers at the same time. That's a completely different way of fighting. So putting both in the same style seems kind of stupid to me. And again, that's the only thing that Charkai is. Charkai is using anything but a single lightsaber. So light whips, which are a very exotic weapon in Star Wars, but they do exist. So whips, a lightsaber whip basically, that would be Charkai. If you use a blaster alongside your sword, that's Charkai. So Charkai is basically the dump for anything that's not a single lightsaber, which I think is an absolutely stupid categorization. I'd actually give the saber stuff its own category, because it's inherently different to fighting with one saber or with both, and 2 lightsabers dual wielding is completely different than the other forms, which I will go into in a little bit. And technically speaking, lightsaber spares and spears or any other variant, even the ones that use force shields alongside a lightsaber, all of these would be Charkai, which is absolutely stupid, I think, but that's how it officially is. Also, it's said that you can only use Charkai in combination with Niman, which kind of makes sense, because you would want to have offensive and counter and defensive and precise techniques in your combat form, whatever you're doing. So it makes sense, but there's no real reason why you couldn't use 2 lightsabers or a lightsaber staff only for defense. Would work perfectly fine. So you could do that with Surisu. Why is it limited to Niman? Because the people who made it had no idea. And then you have Form 7, and Form 7 is 2 forms again. So it's on the dark side, when the evil Sith use it, it's called Chuyo. And Chuyo is basically pouring all your emotions into combat and basically going berserk. Which I think is a thing that you could theoretically do, but this is something that would work with real life weapons, because in real life, the more force, the more power your hits have, the more difficult they are to block, deflect, evade, and you'll just hit harder and cause more damage. And because it's focused on causing a lot of damage, it's more associated with the dark side. The problem here is that, give me a second. The problem here is that if you use Chuyo and you give into your emotions, It somewhat works with real weaponry, like a normal sword, or better weapons that require more oomph, like an axe or a club or something, that are very offensively designed to begin with. Because once you give into, say, your anger or hatred or whatever, I've also been a part of the Somafera group, which specifically tries to recreate the Berserker Ganger and Berserker state with adrenaline highs and use that in combat. The reason this works with real-life weaponry to some extent is because you do need power to do damage. With lightsabers, that's kinda unnecessary and also kinda stupid, because the more force you generate, the more open you are to counter attacks, because you have a longer annunciation of your attack, so the opponent has more time to do something about it, like just evading, getting out of reach, blocking, doing a counter, whatever. And the main reason it works with in real life to some extent is if you have a very offensive weapon like an axe or a club that you can't really use for defense to begin with. More offense is actually a good idea. Also, not to forget that axes and clubs in real life were usually paired with a shield, and the shield did all the defensive thing. And you can bash with a shield, you can go nuts with a shield as well, and you can use it to, you know, hide your blade, you can use it to block the side of your opponent, you can use it as a lever, you can obviously use it to deflect. It's actually the most basic form of dual wielding, because a shield is a defensive tool to block something while you strike. So you're not block, strike like so many games and movies do it. You are block and strike at the exact same time. You don't want to do block, strike, because that's giving away your advantage. Your advantage is that you have two things, one of which can block the opponent's weapon and open them up for a strike, and then striking while your opponent is defenseless. Which is why shields worked so great in real life, because you're doing two things at the same time, not after each other. So shields in Star Wars exist, by the way, and you could use them alongside a lightsaber. I guess the only reason why it's not a common thing to do is because shields block your offhand, and in Star Wars we have seen that many Force users need their offhand to do force powers with. Like, if you look at the official depictions in the movies, almost every single person using force powers while using a lightsaber has to have one hand free to do the force powers with. If you want to do force lightning, you would go like zappity zap. If you do a force push, you'd go like poof. If you do a force pull, you do like poof, like this stuff. If you throw a lightsaber, you guide it with your offhand once it leaves your hand. So it seems that in universe it's much easier to use the force while having your hand unoccupied. Now there is obvious counters to that, because we also have many characters in lore who use Charkai, as in dual wielding, and they have both hands occupied and still can do ceiling. They still can do the force zapping like this while they're having two blades. They can still use the force push, the force pull. They're basically doing the same hand gestures, but with their hand occupied while doing so. So in universe it seems that this is the more difficult way to do things, but it's absolutely working, and we have characters that do that. So it's not necessarily a reason to not have a second weapon. That said, though, it is an explanation why it might be a good idea to go with a single blade. Now, many HEMA channels have pointed out that using two blades at the same time is absolutely OP in Star Wars, with lightsabers I mean, because in the real world the main reason why you don't want to use two swords at the same time is because you need to generate force and edge alignment to do damage. Now, if you have two blades, creating force is difficult. I have my second one out of reach right now, but the general idea is, if I attack like this, I'm not going to generate as much force as if I'm holding this with two hands and going like this. I'm also, if I'm just single-handed, I have more reach. If I'm having two, I'm actually reducing my reach, or I have to do it like this, and then I might as well just use one, because now I can't use them simultaneously. So the biggest advantage of dual wielding is that you can do two things at the same time, just like we had with the shield. Now using a shield is technically speaking already dual wielding. Now in usual, when we speak about real life, dual wielding usually means two objects in your hands, usually offensive weapons. Historically, the most common type of dual wielding was one regular sized one-handed sword and one short sword or dagger. That was commonly used because the offhand was used to block and defend, and just like a shield basically, and the main hand was used to strike and actually do the damage, which perfectly works. It would be a better idea to use a shield, but that was done. And the cool thing about the offhand weapons usually were that they had some spikes or anything to catch a blade and trap it, which a shield would just glance it off and make it available for opponent again. With the gadgets you can trap it, you can break the blade, which wouldn't work with a lightsaber because a lightsaber can't break. So that's kind of useless. Also, it would cut straight through the blocking off guard if it wasn't a lightsaber, and you can't have lightsabers with spikes like that. So that's why that doesn't exist. Also, when you're dual wielding in the real world, you're usually doing it in duels, like announced duels, like rapier, and like 2 rapiers was done at some duels historically. Dual wielding existed historically, but it was rather rare and usually limited to duels. There is very few records of people using dual wielding on the battlefield. We have some of these in Japan, where a samurai used a katana and the what's it called, wakizashi at the same time and went nuts on the battlefield. Again, wakizashi being smaller and used to block, which makes sense because samurai usually didn't use shields, so having an offhand thing to block incoming strikes with was very useful. Why didn't samurai use shields? Different topic. I'm not going into that right now. The main thing is that if you have an actual weapon in your offhand, it can threaten your opponent and be very distracting so that he doesn't see the actual danger coming in. That's the main purpose in real life. Now in Star Wars with lightsabers, dual wielding is absolutely broken because almost all of the disadvantages of dual wielding in real life go away. You don't need to generate force to kill something with this. A light touch is enough. So dual wielding's biggest problem of not being able to generate power behind your strikes gone out of the window, because you don't need to generate power for your strikes to actually hurt really bad and kill stuff. So a light touch is enough, so dual wielding, cool. Second problem of dual wielding, edge alignment. Keeping 2 edges aligned to your opponent to deal decent damage, super difficult to do. Most people can't even do it with a single edge. Now lightsabers, omnidirectional, no problem. You can just hit however you want. You don't have to pay any attention to edge alignment. So great thing there. Now for reach, okay, that one still exists. If I'm using 2 at the same time, I'm not as easily able to extend and increase my reach. I mean, you can, but then you're kind of diminishing the point of having 2 of those. You still can, but it's a little bit more tricky. Also, one of the most problems with dual wielding, biggest issues with dual wielding in real life, is that it takes a lot of practice to use 2 weapons at the same time, because it's kind of confusing. Most people are left or right-handed and don't use both at the same time in such a manner. It's easier to hit yourself with, which if it's lightsabers, that's a very, very bad thing to happen to you, and it just takes a lot more practice to do that. Now in Star Wars, you have supernatural abilities that absolutely make you capable of wielding these with way less problems, and let's not forget that the Sith and the Jedi practice like on a daily basis for years with these, so yeah, they are proficient enough to dual wield properly. So dual wielding absolutely broken. Lightsaber staff, little different thing there, because with the sometimes the mechanism doesn't like to do what I want it to do. So with a staff, you kind of have an advantage and a disadvantage. Now, the problem with the lightsaber staff particularly is that in real life, staffs are cool because you can grip them anywhere. You can grip it, I don't want to do it with this blade, you can grip it like so and have an insane reach advantage. You can generate a lot more force because of leverage. With a lightsaber, you can't. You are limited to this. You can't grip anywhere else. So one of the biggest advantages of wielding a staff, which is reach and force generation, like power generation, out the window. Not possible with that. The other cool thing about a staff is that you can very quickly strike from different angles, like this basically. Now, in real life, staffs are usually omnidirectional because they don't have an edge. Usually there's exceptions to that, but usually it doesn't matter how you hit, you will always do the same amount of damage. Same with these things. Now, the cool thing about the saber staff is really that you can have a flurry of blows, or you can spin it to deflect blaster bolts more effectively. So in universe it does have its reasons why it's existing, but basically this is inferior to a single lightsaber. Many would say, but how so? Well, some in-lore explanation that was official, by the way, is that, oh, you can't predict the strikes with this. Yeah, you absolutely can, because my blade can't travel on any other angle than this that I'm holding. Like, if I know where this blade is, I know where that blade is, and I can't use them both at the same time. I have to alternate between those. So it's not unpredictable at all. It is a little bit more difficult to handle because you have to have two objects in mind, more or less, instead of just one, but it's still very predictable. It's not really good. The saber staff is not a great weapon because, again, the main reasons why the staff is great in real life go away with the saber staff, because, again, one of the biggest advantages why real world staff weapons were so effective is because they're super easy to learn. You can't really hurt yourself with that. Like, if you whack yourself with a stick, there's no real damage occurring, especially if you're wearing armor. It's really difficult to mess up with this weapon, which is why so many militaries around the world used a staff weapon like a spear as their absolute base weapon for every soldier, because it's easy to learn. It's just a stick. Everyone can grab a stick and practice. You don't need anything fancy like a swordsmith to create a stick. You can just grab a stick and train with that. So sticks basically super effective in the real world. In Star Wars, most advantages of the stick go away because this still requires a lot of training, arguably even more training than the single-edged one, because now you have two blades you can cut yourself with. And if you have trained with a saber staff, you will hit yourself quite a lot. Single-handed, probably you're not going to hit yourself, like, unless you are not very dexterous or have problems with that. But with a single lightsaber, I think most people can pick one up and fight with that without hitting themselves. Not that difficult. With this, different story. So again, most of the advantages of having a staff go away with the lightsaber stuff. Complete opposite with dual wielding lightsabers, because if you dual wield lightsabers, haha, now things get really messy and really interesting. Now it's very unpredictable. Now it's really tough to, like I mentioned precognition, that the supernatural ability that kind of allows you to see what happens in the future in the next few seconds. If you have two of those, that's two objects. That's literally two objects that you have to keep in mind instead of just one, which is what most Force users are trained to do. So with two of these, you have a much better chance to outsmarting the precognition of your opponent. And if you do sparring with like choreography and stuff like that, I've linked it to choreography in a different video. If you do choreographies with two weapons, it's much easier for one party to mess up, and thus allowing, you're more likely to get a hit in, even if your opponent is exactly knowing what's coming, because keeping two of these and in mind is much more difficult. Also, very important thing about dual wielding is that if you dual wield these, you how do I say that, you have the ability to attack from two different angles at the same time. You limit the opponent's options to defend from that. Because if I'm doing like a scissor cut like this, and the blades are coming in from two different directions at the same time, if your opponent just has one lightsaber or saber staff, they can't block both. They would need two of these to block. So they can't block both. One strike will hit if they try to block. If they try to counter, they may counter one and you both get hit because they can't counter two at the same time. Not gonna work. They could get a step out of reach. They could do some crazy dodge maneuver, though again dodging difficult if the attacks come from two different levels. Now I can't really properly show it on this camera, but if one attack comes up here and the other down below, what you're gonna do, you can't jump over it because that's that. If you just attack your legs, you could just jump over it if you're a Jedi. Now you can't because this will hit you. Now if I'm striking high, you might just want to duck beneath that. You can't because now you're gonna be hit by that. So your only option is to really step out of reach and move backward. And now I know what you're doing and can just do an extended lunge and still get you, because I can extend my reach too, or can just throw the lightsaber. I can actually throw both lightsabers at an arc at you. Good luck with that. With two lightsabers, there's just so many cool things that you can do. Now, I think I've gone on long enough about dual wielding. Back to Form 7, Vapat. That's the variant that the Jedi use, and basically only a very select few use, and Mace Windu being the only one who can do it without falling to the dark side, because again it's going into your motions, and it's another Mace Windu special that he actually wanted to have that has no base in lore, and it's just kind of stupid, because the thing with Vapat is that it says, well, you give into your emotions, but you're edging, you're not really letting go to your emotions. So you're not then. Well, you do to an extent. Okay, so you do to an extent. So everyone else just finds stoic without any emotions. Okay, cool. But that's the general idea behind Vapat. It's basically the same as Chuyo, just that you don't give in completely. So you're a half berserker. How does that work? That's not how this works. Either you have an adrenaline rush or you don't. Not a fan of the whole idea of Vapat, because I think it's just silly. It's Chuyo, and it's just because they don't want Windu go dark side, which he is. He's technically a grey one, but just by using Chuyo, which is a dark side fighting style, using dark side powers to fuel it, he is using it as a Jedi. Makes him a grey one in my opinion, but whatever. He's edging that. That's Vapat, but it's basically the same idea as Chuyo, as in you give in your motions and rack really hard. Now, how is Chuyo stupid in the Star Wars universe? Because again, you don't need to generate a lot of force to hurt with a lightsaber. So the whole idea behind Chuyo, giving into your motion stuff, not as practical. However, I will say from personal experience, from using the Berserker trance, if you really give in to your emotions, you're not only striking harder, the important thing, you are striking faster, because if you generate more force with your strikes, you can either hit harder or hit faster, and the faster part is what makes this viable in lightsaber combat, and is sometimes mentioned in canon sources, because if you go nuts, you attack faster now, and attacking faster is a great thing. It's increasing your offensive capabilities, makes it tougher to defend against, and if you're swinging faster, you get more attacks in, which is how the RPG systems handle it. If you use Chuyo, you actually get like every 3 attacks you get a 4th one for free. So you have an extra attack, which is really cool, and can be super powerful and super lethal, which is again why the Jedi kinda don't want to use Chuyo, because they don't want lethality in combat, which I think is, if you go into combat, you should be willing to kill your opponent, otherwise you're putting yourself at a great disadvantage, because well, they will certainly try to kill you. So with that said, that's the fighting styles per se. There's a few others that are mentioned as separate fighting forms, which I have to strongly disagree with, because they're not really fighting forms. I mean, the ones we had so far aren't really. So you have Dun Mok, which is basically trash talking. It's basically rage baiting your opponent with words like your mom jokes or something until they go ah and go full offense on you, like triggering their inner Chuyo or something. And then they're apparently easier to counter because you bait them, and now they just don't fight with a brain anymore and just go absolutely wild like a little child on a rage mode. So that's the idea of Dunmok, rage baiting your enemies. That's something, by the way, that the Sith use. I don't think I've ever seen a Jedi use it, but the idea is to get in the head of your opponent by trash talking. It can take forms like talking about in the cinematic trailer with the green Twi'lek of this Wotor, where he says we can find your brother and something. It's really trying to get into your opponent's head to end the fight, which is technically speaking not a fighting form, but it's psychological warfare. There's another form whose name I forgot that is said to make use of the terrain that you're standing on, like high ground. By the way, having the high ground in an infantry fight, like a melee fight, is not a good idea, because opponent has you have much more exposed legs, easier to hit, harder to hit your opponent effectively. It's actually a bad idea to have the high ground in melee combat. In archery, it's a fantastic thing. You absolutely want the high ground as an archer. In melee, you don't want to have the high ground. Your legs are way too exposed. Anyway, making use of your terrain is apparently in Star Wars its own fighting style, which it shouldn't be, because that should be common sense. And it's not just the terrain that you're standing on, it's also stuff like throwing objects at your opponent, luring them into dangerous areas or something like that. Like if you are a species that can breathe a certain atmosphere and the other can't, then you might try to lure them into a gas chamber or something where you can breathe but they can't. That would all be this fighting form. The thing that I have a problem with here is that shouldn't be a fighting form, that's just common sense. If you can do that, if you can get a strategical advantage by changing terrain or using the terrain around you, you should do that, and you usually do that, unless you are a moron. But apparently it's its own thing. So I think I've gone long enough about the fighting forms per se. The next video I actually want to go a little bit into detail how to make this practical. With that said, I wish you a wonderful day, have a great time, and may the Force be with you.